Bill and Dana, welcome to the program. I'm really delighted to have you on and also to talk about your book. I mean, as I've already shared with you guys offline, I had the pleasure of having lunch with both of you in DC a couple of weeks ago. That was a real delight, and as I've shared with you then, I think, and certainly I'll say it again right now. This book is in the middle of the sweet spot for MinistryWatch. It's right in the center of the bullseye. Our mission is to help Christians become more faithful stewards of the resources God has entrusted to them. And I can't think of a book that really is a better explication of that mission statement for MinistryWatch than your book. So thanks for writing it.
Thank you, Warren.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us on.
You bet. Let's start though with a core principle. I mean, I think certainly I know, and a lot of our listeners will kind of understand this distinction between stewardship and ownership. But since it is the name of your book, and since it is such a core concept, can we start there? What do you mean by stewardship, and how is that different from ownership?
The whole stewardship goes to the question. It's really the heart of our book, which is why I put it in the title, because it changes everything. If we look at God as sort of like a cosmic divine tax man, God, the tax man, we pay our taxes, the government gets our cut, it's cut, and then the rest of it is ours to do as we see fit. That's the wrong way to look at things. If we just say God wants his tithe, and then the rest, the other 90% is ours to use, it's a complete misunderstanding of the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative is there's nothing which we have which is our own. It all belongs to God, not just our money, by the way, but our time, our talent, our ties, meaning our relationships. We are made in his image to glorify him. What is the chief end of humans? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. That goes back to the creation mandate. And so once we begin to see all of our money as belonging to God, it's no longer just that God cares about how much we're tithing or not tithing. It's like, what am I spending my money on? What kind of car do I drive? Where do I put my investments? How much money am I saving? He wants us to surrender all of our money to him, which is different than giving away all of our money. The rich young ruler was asked to give away all of his money. That's, for most of us, anomalous. That's not going to be the standard for most of us. Most of us are called to be like the ant in Proverbs, to save up for the future rather than like the grasshopper. However, surrendering it all is absolutely the call for all Christians, and so that he becomes Lord of all of our money.
Well, I do want to return to that idea later about surrendering all of your money, that even the money that you invest and the money that you save is also God's money, not just the money that you give away. But Dana, I couldn't tell from your nodding whether you were wanting to add something to that or whether I can move on to the next question. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, let me add something real quick. When we think of a steward, they are a manager with a boss, right? And they're in charge. It's their realm. They're in charge. That's what dominion means. We have a dominion over a realm, and it's our resources. It's also our relationships, our neighborhoods, everything. And we're supposed to impact that for the glory of God, the good of others, and taking care of our own needs as well. And so I think of stewardship as I'm a manager, and I look to God as my boss, and I say, how do you want me to manage these resources so that I properly take care of the people I'm supposed to, and then create a surplus so that I can be generous, right? And so that I can be prepared for events that, negative events in the future. But if we don't create a surplus, we can't be generous. And so I think of management as trying to create that surplus with the intention of being generous.
Yeah, no, that's a great word. The ideas that you guys have already introduced here, I could take any one of them and probably we could spend an hour talking about their unpacking those ideas, which causes me to wonder, how did y'all get here? I mean, the ideas behind your very few words so far, to my way of thinking, reflect a lot of wisdom, a lot of sophistication, probably a lot of hard-won knowledge. So just real briefly, and I know you do this in your book, could each of you tell me, and Bill, maybe we'll start with you, what is your journey of generosity? How did you get to the place where you have these ideas and you think they're so important as guiding principles in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in my parents. They were imperfect for sure, like most of our parents, and like we are to our children. But I still saw them as faithful tithers. And so for me, it started with the tithe. I always tithed. It was always important. I always had a sense of pretty early on of my responsibility to the poor. I remember the Lord led me as a senior in college to sell my most prized possession, which was my stereo, and give all the money to compassion, to care for the poor in the developing world. And so that runs deep in me. Dana and I both read Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger by Ron Sider back in the 70s, probably, when it came out. We didn't agree with all of his prescriptions, but we sure agreed with that sense that we have a special responsibility, especially Christians in the West who are so wealthy. But then I think also we were at a church where there were some people who were billionaires. It was a small church. Dennis and Eileen Bakke. Dennis was a co-founder of AES, the power company, and they were incredible stewards and were so exemplary in their stewardship. They wanted our church to save money, so we all had Saturday bathroom cleaning duty. And I remember cleaning bathroom stalls with billionaire Dennis Bakke very early on. So I think for us, when we got married, it just came alive, and we were very poor. We had negative net worth. We lived in a fine one-bedroom apartment, as long as you didn't mind cockroaches. We had no car. And we began from the beginning just to see as all of our money as an expression of our faith and our love for God, as a love letter to God from the beginning. And I remember coming alive that first year of marriage, thinking about, wow, God cares about all of this. But it was with and under the tutelage of people like the Bakkes who were teaching us to be stewards right from the start.
Yeah, and I should just mention that one of the things I love about your book is that you have lots of stories of people that are incarnating, shall we say, this idea of generosity, and the Bakkes are among the folks that you do talk about in the book. We're going to come back to that story piece of it in just a minute. But before we do that, Dana, your story, it's a lot of similarities. I mean, obviously, you guys have been married for a long time, so you've been on the road together for a good bit of your journey. But your early days was a little bit different than Bill's. Is that accurate?
That's true. I grew up, I didn't know I was in a wealthy family. I thought of myself as middle class, but when Bill met me and told me, kind of, no, I think you're more upper class and pretending you're not. But my issue was really that I knew there were three reasons that people divorce, and one of them is over money. And so before we got married, I really wanted, and both Bill and I were so committed to marriage, and we wanted to make sure we were on the same page around money so that we weren't fighting about that and that we had harmony around that. So we went through a Crown financial program. Larry Burkett was alive at the time, and just amazing teaching. And really it's basic. It's live below your means, always tithe either 10% or more, save 10% or more, and then avoid debt, particularly non-productive debt. Education, investing in education would be productive debt. Investing in a vacation would not be. And then the other passion I've always had since I was a little girl was the idea of poverty, and that wealthy people, anyone who has much is obligated to help those who don't have as much. It's that generosity component. And how can you do that? Well, one of the main things that people have seen, at least in America, is if you live under these biblical principles, you will not indebt yourself and you will not be poor. You will eventually tap into, a very amazing principle that God has built into the universe, which is compound interest. And if you start saving and living on those basic biblical worldview, principles, you will most likely accumulate a surplus, which then you need to be intentional about starting to be generous with. But if you go the other way and go into debt, that compounding interest on the wrong way will enslave you. Yeah. And I was terrified of being enslaved because debt was probably what caused my parents to divorce. And so I'd say some of my seeking this whole thing out was based on fear of what I'd seen in my family.
Okay, so both of you have your own respective stories. You get married, you come together, you know, make some decisions in your own life that have obviously borne good fruit. Um, while I think that's a beautiful story, and I'm glad to hear it, and I'm sure other people are as well, it's not a unique story. And in fact, there are at least 24 other stories in your book, the ones that you have written about. So why did you feel like you wanted to write the book? Why did you think that your stories and the stories that you were going to aggregate and the lessons from those stories were necessary now in this cultural moment? Was there a great need that you saw, or a great burden that you had, or was it a little of both?
So in our personal lives, I think, Warren, we've been on this journey, as you said, from the beginning. We've always been extremely intentional and focused on financial stewardship, including when we had negative net worth and we were, you know, underwater with school debt and not making much money. And we just kept growing in it. And then we did have an inheritance, which came from Dana's dad after he had died. And that kind of changed our world. We had been steadily growing in our net worth. We were always people who lived below our means. Our kids thought we were poor relative to their friends, because when we take them to the zoo, we packed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that we would eat by the gorilla enclosure. And their kids' friends would go over to the stand and, you know, order the expensive hot dogs or whatever. And but that living below our means then was helping us grow our wealth. Then we have this wealth event this time when we start getting inheritance, and we thought we really need to learn from other Christians about how is it that we steward this wisely, because we thought this is from God and we wanted to honor him with this. We did not want to hear the words at the end of our time here on earth. The Lord says, Bill and Dana, we gave you all this money and you were using it for self-indulgence and luxuries and not honorably. So we found that we couldn't talk to other people in our lives about this. When we tried to bring it up with people, it was as if we were bringing up the most personal question that was out of bounds. These were other Christians, like it's kind of an unspoken rule. You do not talk about money. And we're like, we want to be good stewards. How do we learn to do this other than just reading Crown Ministries books, which we loved, and that was always, and Larry Burkett and other great resources. So we started going to various gatherings where we'd hear people openly share about their stewardship journeys. And we got so excited about it, and it gave us ideas. We saw innovation. Not everybody has the same story, but we saw people leaning into this, and we actually think it's a work of the Spirit. I can't explain why it's happening now and not 50 years ago, but you see all of these Christian organizations sprouting up around the question of financial stewardship right now. The Lord, we felt led to share with others the things we learned from all these other people. And so that's why we put it in the story form for so much of it, of like, here's what this person did. And they're not all prescriptive stories, Warren. We're not trying to say everybody does it this way. It's not cookie cutter. One person can drive a really nice car. Another person can't at all. It's a conversation with God. And but there are some overriding principles, and there's incredibly exciting ways to use our capital beyond just writing a check to the church, which we think unleashes power, especially in the lives of the poor. And that's a particular call for us, as poverty alleviation and what we call poverty prevention.
Yeah. Dana, anything to add to that?
No, I think he added everything. Yeah, that's great.
One of the things, Bill, that you said early on, and it was a light bulb kind of went off for me, and I want you to maybe say a couple more words about it. We got so many ideas that we need to unpack that we're just not going to be able to. Let me just stipulate for the record: go get their book, go read their book, and we'll, at the end of the podcast episode, I'll give you a way to do that that I think you'll appreciate. But you said something earlier in our conversation that struck me, because it was a little bit of a twist on an expression that I heard before. A lot of people will talk about time, treasure, and talents. You said something else. You said time, treasure, talent, and ties, which which is about relationships. A light bulb went off for me when you said that. I had not really heard that expression before, I'm embarrassed to say. And one of the things that I picked up from your book was just the importance of relationship and making these decisions in community, acting in community, getting advice from others in a community of believers like the Gathering or Generous Giving and other kinds of organizations. Dana, Bill, I don't know which one of you wants to take this question, but would you say more about that idea?
Sure. So that verse about spur one another on towards good works, I really do think we need to be encouraged, because you can get compassion fatigue. There are so many heavy brokenness and problems in the world, and of course we can't fix them all, but we are called to address some of them. And I believe we're supposed to look some locally, some nationally, and some even internationally. So Bill and I try to look at all those in ways both that we use our time and our treasure and our talent and our tithe. I also think thoughts. I've been trying to think of all the T's I could think of, because we're supposed to be generous with our thoughts as well, right?
Wow.
Period.
Yeah.
But our ties are important because often you can link one person up with another, but it takes some time, and then magic happens because those two people will be more generous and more effective in their impact or their giving together. And so I think, lending references, connecting people, gathering people together in community over small groups, very important discussion and dialogue, because so few people do talk about this topic. So I would encourage people to go to generousgiving.org and look at their journeys of generosities. They're called jogs, and you can do them in your city, or you can do them online, but they are just really amazing small groups for free that you can walk through the biblical generosity principles. And again, wrestle with these ideas before the Lord, and not come out with a prescriptive answer that looks like everyone else, but looks fit to your purpose and to what you were made for. And comes out with joy. It's really a journey of joy after that.
Bill, I wanted you to talk about an idea that's you devote a whole chapter to in the book, and that is the importance of work that you mention. Both of you mentioned in the book that Brian Fikkert and who was the co-author's name? I know
Steve
Brian.
Corbett. Steve Corbett. Yeah.
Steve Corbett. Yeah. Fikkert and Corbett's book, When Helping Hurts, and they've done a couple of other sequels since then. But one of the things that they talk about in that book, which I think that you guys, really picked up the ball on this idea, is that, not all charity is helpful, and that charity that doesn't reinforce or acknowledge or promote human flourishing in all its forms, recognize the dignity inherent in us as humans, is not charity at all. It's I don't know what you would call it, selfishness, it's power, it's control, whatever it might be. And you devote a whole chapter to that idea, this chapter on work. Bill, can you say more about that idea?
Yeah, work, I think for many people is a curse. I think of the old 80s song, everybody's working for the weekend. That is a misnomer. I think I heard Olasky say it first. We work we rest in order to work rather than the opposite, right? Work is really what we were made to do. It precedes the fall. The thorns came in the fall, making work more arduous. But work is something that we were given in the creation mandate. We will work in heaven. We will have productivity. God is a worker. God worked before there was a fall, right? And so work is a blessing for humanity. We are made to work. And so I think this notion that everybody is, leaning towards, often in American culture at least, I want to save up all my money so I get to that place where I don't have to work anymore. We think that's wrong. You become one giant leisure machine, or you become that angry old guy yelling at kids to stay off their lawn. We don't want to become that. Work is a blessing. It's something we're given to do. So we want to ennoble people with work. When you give, the proverbial person a fish, they haven't worked for that. They don't value that. If you, instead of giving them even a fishing pole, lend them money to buy a fishing pole so they can go fish. That's ennobling. Arthur Brooks, who's endorsed our book, talks about there's two ways to be very unhappy in your life. One is to go on welfare. Another is to win the lottery. You wouldn't think of those as ways to make you unhappy, but the problem is it's unearned income. Earned income is a joy to us. Making a difference in the world through work is a joy. This is not a burden we put on the poor. This is a blessing. I would rather go into one of the businesses in which we've invested in the developing world and see people working, as we did in Mozambique at Sunshine Nuts Factory, see them processing cashews. And they're not there thinking, oh, who are our white saviors over here? They're like, I traded my labor for wages. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Rather than us coming in and handing out dollars for them to do something. 40% of wells in Africa are inoperative. Why? Because we think they came at it as from the wrong perspective. It's like giving people cut flowers. That's not what we want to do. We want to really ennoble people with the dignity of work.
Yeah. Dana, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think that one area which I love that you're a part of is helping us think through what effective impact is and effective charity. Because there are times and places where you're going to need straight nonprofit money and even giving a fish, right? When you have a humanitarian disaster or your church planting, you're not going to be trying to make money off that. There's no market mechanism for that. You are giving people in an emergency situation. So there's definitely all kinds of opportunities for charity. And then charity can also catalyze other market mechanisms. But I really do believe we need to be thinking more and more about our strategies and our methodologies for achieving the kinds of impact of poverty alleviation or food security or anti-human trafficking. And so there is a burgeoning group of people thinking through how to use business for good. There's the whole business as mission movement, faith-driven investor, faith-driven entrepreneur, and a place where I work, Impact Foundation, allows you to use your charitable capital to invest in for-profit companies doing transformational work. Therefore, this is kind of the beautiful intersection of charity and business. And you can invest equity or debt with charitable capital. It stays in the charitable realm, but if the company pays you back after they've, after the investment loan or debt, loan or equity, then that money comes back to your donor advised fund and you can recycle it over and over and have continued impact.
Well, that was another chapter that that I wanted to talk about, because you do mention that and I guess on the one hand, it's just kind of simple math, right? Our asset bucket for most people is much larger than our charity bucket. Even if we're faithful, givers and we're tithers and even above the tithe, it is highly likely that the money that we have invested is going to be a larger bucket. And if you can energize that bucket, if you can mobilize the assets in that bucket, you're going to have a huge, or potentially you can have a much larger impact than even your charitable dollars. That seems to be where you're going with that. Do I have you right in that, Dana?
Yes. And I'll let Bill talk about the pie chart that we found so powerful and we put it in our book.
That's right. Yeah. I did notice that in the book. In fact, at first I didn't think it was a pie chart. I just thought it was a big old circle, right?
I know, because in the pie chart, you see 99% of one color and less than 1% of a different color. That less than 1% is charitable giving in the United States. The 99% is liquid investable assets in the United States. We focus a lot of time as Christians thinking about being effective rightly with that 1%. How much time do we give to that 99%? And how is that aligning with our faith. So if I told you, Warren, that strip clubs were doing extraordinarily well right now, and if you invest in this strip club fund, you'll be able to give more money to missionaries, you'd think I'm out of my mind, right? Terrible idea. Yet for many of us, what we do is we tell our broker, if we have a broker, or if we just like think about our risk tolerance for whatever investments we have, we just say, well, here's my risk tolerance. Just go make it work, right? And we find out that we might well be likely are investing in some things which are anathema to us and counter to what we're actually doing with our charitable dollars. We're helping to create problems so that we can fix them over here with our charitable dollars. So we want to look at this as what we think a godly perspective, which is he cares about those investment dollars. And indeed, when you look at the world's problems, very often the problems are too big for the charitable bucket. Even if the Christians did start tithing 10%, on average, evangelicals tithe about 3%. Even if we started 10%, which would be great, nonprofits would be flush with cash, there'd be new nonprofits filling up. Relative to the world's problems, it's not enough. Even that wouldn't be enough. There's so many issues which need to be addressed through for-profit dollars, both because it's scalable, but also because it's sustainable.
Yeah.
Profit, we write about this in the book. God loves profit. Profit is part of the creation mandate. Obviously, exploitation is bad, but profit as God intended it is a good thing. We don't plant a seed so we can harvest a seed. We plant a seed so we can harvest much more than that. That's built into the way God made the world before the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bill and Dana, we've got to land this airplane here pretty soon. So I'm going to skip a lot of what's in the book and just kind of come to the end. You've got a final chapter, fully integrating faith in finances, and you've got a list of 10, or rather, I should say 8 dominant themes that you focus on in the book, and I'm going to read them all, but not we don't have time to explicate them all. But let me hit you with the humility, focus on others. I think in some ways those are self-explanatory, so I don't want to dwell on those too much. But the number 3 caused me to scratch my head a little bit. And I'm just wondering if you can help me. Light and easy yokes. Although each person had made substantial sacrifices to pursue their calling. These are the person's stories you tell. There wasn't a sense of heaviness or deprivation. Instead, each person seemed amazed at how much they have, even after giving to others. That's sort of the counterintuitive, paradoxical piece of this whole thing that you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, yeah, Warren, the whole idea of the journey is really key because different people experience at least the beginning of generosity differently. I don't have the gift of generosity, and Bill does, but it doesn't mean I'm not supposed to be generous. We're all supposed to lean into that as a virtue. So when I first started with generosity, it was more out of duty, a little bit out of guilt and fear. But it was still a good thing that I surrendered and stepped out, whereas Bill was more joyful from the start. But over time, we've both grown into that joy and seeing what I love is seeing the fruits of it and over the long haul. And what we found with these 24 people was this light and easy yoke. Why? Because eventually you will experience the joy and you will have an abundance mindset. You will experience more peace. And you'll feel more satisfied because you're right in the middle of God's will in terms of the good works that He has prepared for you to do from the beginning of time. And of course, that would produce an inner peace and satisfaction if we know we were created for such a time as this in terms of helping to tear off pieces of darkness and also bring light to areas that need the light.
Yeah, that's such a good word. I said I wasn't going to linger on every single one of these 8, but I got to stop again on the very next one, gratitude. You say everyone in that you profiled was filled with gratitude for God's blessings in their lives. And I've sometimes heard teachers, it may have been in fact Randy Alcorn or Chuck Bentley, who are people that I know you guys admire and look up to, who said that sometimes an impediment to generosity is that we're not grateful ourselves. We don't have a real understanding of just how generous God has been to us, and that it is ironically, it is a lack of gratitude towards regarding God's generosity to us that becomes an impediment to our own generosity to others. It seems to me that that is a little bit of what you're getting at here. Do I have that right, Bill?
Yeah. I mean, generosity is gratitude and generosity are linked, and contentment, right? I mean, all of those things, it's kind of like you have a bank account with a lot of money in it, and you need to remember the PIN. The PIN is gratitude. And it unlocks that sense of joy. And then generosity gets our eyes off of ourselves, and it gets it on other people. I think our propensity, I know mine is to think about me all day long. What we found in these stories are people thinking about others, and they're finding so much joy in being able to participate in meeting the needs of others and helping to bring flourishing empowerment to others. That's why we put in the title of the book, The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith, because it's what we heard again and again from these generous and wise stewards, is the joy that comes from it.
Yeah. Okay, gratitude, joy is number 5. So, and you mentioned that agency. We've talked about that a little bit. That there's agency. I think that givers feel whenever they give, but also they are creating. That they're empowering other people so that they have greater sense of agency as well. At least that's kind of what I took away. Am I getting that right, Dana?
Yeah, I think it's agency for both the giver and the recipient.
Yeah.
Giver because you're actually expressing the talents that God gave you and stepping into the callings that He gave you and created you for. And everything in a bit is co-laboring, co-creating with the Lord these good works in the world. And then for the recipient, again, if it's received in gratitude, and again, knowing that it's all the Lord's and we are just pass through, I'm a pass through and a conduit for that generosity for that person in need then, but I have been received so much from other conduits of generosity when I was in need. So I think if we look at that, it's our shared humanity and our shared dependence, essentially in the end on the Lord. And that's where trust comes in. God meets our needs through either our own efforts or through others' efforts, and then we can rejoice in that as brothers and sisters.
Yeah, not that God is necessarily calling us to give away our last dime, but
Right.
if we give away our last dime, knowing that while it may be my last dime, but it's not God's last dime, that there's plenty more dimes where that one came from. And you do have that trust. I mean, I can really see what you're saying there, Dana, that trust and generosity are so linked that if we really trust God, we know that He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and our fear is, dramatically diminished in that. Okay, let me keep. No dour ascetics is number 7. In other words, you don't give out of a sense of duty, responsibility, legalism, but give joyfully. Is that what you're saying there?
Well, we were saying, actually, this is what we found. As Dana likes to say, if you can't give cheerfully, that doesn't mean that you don't give. You still give. There's still a duty, whether you feel cheerful or not. Cheerfulness is something which I think we can grow in time, but we're not absolved of the responsibility to give. But what we found in these people that we interviewed, and these are just, I mean, we could have done another 24 stories. We found so many people like this in our lives, is that they are not dour about it. These are not people self-flagellating, saying, oh yeah, well, I gave up my vacation, I never eat out, I don't really, kind of have a miserable life, but at least I'm helping people in the world. That's not what we found. We found people who were incredibly excited about how they were changing the world. And they would look at what they had and they'd often say to us, we're not without anything. I mean, so we have a smaller house than we could have. Big deal. We love the house we do have. I mean, there's that sense of joy in what you do have and joy in what you give. And I think one thing we heard from people sometimes was they were sad that they couldn't give more.
Wow, what a good word. And finally, for those people that have that attitude, they hear the words of number 8, well done, good and faithful servant, right? I mean, that's in some ways, that's the capstone experience. That's the goal. That's the prize for running the race faithfully. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And I think we can experience a taste of that here when we celebrate with others who are generous. That's why I think we don't always hide, yes, we're not supposed to be pompous or look at me, I'm the giver. That's why he says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. But he then says, let your light so shine that others may see and give glory to God. And so I think there are times to encourage one another with one another's growth in sanctification in the area of generosity, and celebrate the giving that we can do and that we see, and then the impacts of that giving.
Yeah. Bill, anything to add to that?
No, that captures it.
Oh, great. Very good. Well, listen, I do like often to ask a final question. And that question is, what was I not smart enough to ask you? Or what was something that we covered in the midst of a lot of things that we covered here that you want to make sure is a takeaway? That people, in the midst of all these words that all three of us have said here today, is there one key idea that you want to make sure they remember if they forget everything else? Bill?
Yeah, I'd say where to begin, because it can be intimidating to people, and the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So start with a prayer of surrender. Surrender, as you said, Warren, that's different than giving away all your money. Surrendering all your money, we're all called to that. We're not all called to giving away all of our money. That's number one. Number two, read a book, listen to a podcast, go to crown.org for Crown Ministries or generous giving or something. Start the process of thinking about it. And I would say number three, start keeping track of all of your money that you spend. It's not so hard anymore. Lots of budget programs out there. You can quickly download all of your expenses from your debit card, your credit card, or whatever, because it's hard to know where your money should go if you don't know where your money is going. Start with where are you spending money? Do that for 3 months, and then create a budget based on that.
Yeah. Dana, anything to add to that?
Sure. And I think I'd just like to say thank you to MinistryWatch, because what you do plays such a critical role in the whole ecosystem of giving. We need to know that we're having effective impact. We need to be able to have transparency and accountability and best practices, which you do create both with MinistryWatch in terms of the biblical lens you use, as well as the different teaching tools you provide. And then also, I love that you have dialogue around these issues. There's not just one way to assess things, but I think you do one of the best. And I have been concerned in the past that some of the secular, charity watch groups, I'm not going to name any particular ones, but some of them don't really give the full picture. And I'm all about impact and kingdom impact, and you are one of the best at shining a light in that area, and also on fraud and abuse as well. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that good word, and also for the shout out to MinistryWatch in your book. I'm grateful for that as well. So Bill and Dana, thank you so much for being on the program today. Thank you for this book, Stewards Not Owners. I had read it and found it to be extremely nourishing and encouraging, and at times challenging. And I think that's what a great book should be, all three. And so God bless you. Thank you. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Warren.
Thanks, Warren.